Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to the JEET Reviewer webinar. I'm very happy that you're here. We have about 12 people at this point. And so we'll wait a little bit to see who else joins. But in the meantime, let me introduce myself. I'm Soham Sohoni. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I work at Arizona State University. And since you've joined, I'm assuming you've seen the description. So I'm also the Associate Director for IUCEE, and I serve as the Co-Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Engineering Education Transformations, or JEET. So once again, I'll say I'm happy to have you here. And we have not enabled audio for all the participants because we didn't know how many will show up. Sometimes there's 30, 40, 50 people. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything that you want to share with me, please use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar, and I'll keep an eye out on that all throughout this webinar. So if you want to type in anything, please do that. I'll be checking on that periodically. So let's actually get started. Hopefully you can see my screen. Let me just check. Yeah, it looks like you can see my screen. So the first thing, if you are new to reviewing for JEET, is to actually log in to JEET, or at least get a login name or a username for JEET. And one of the frequent questions I get whenever I ask people to become reviewers for JEET is, there's no way for me to sign up as a reviewer. And that's accurate. That's true. So what you need to do actually is, if you go to the home page of JEET, which is journaleeth.org, you click on the login button here. It will take you to a page that asks you to log in. So I already have a login, but if I didn't, then I would go to not a user, register with this site. So if I click that one, that will take you to a page which lets you put in some useful information like a username and a password, of course, but also an affiliation, perhaps a signature if you want one, your first and last name, of course. And then I thought there was something else that was useful that you could put in. So there's a bio statement, and one thing that could be useful for you to put in here instead of a whole bio is to just perhaps list the areas that you would want to review for JEET, or your areas of expertise. So it could be anything, fluid mechanics, or general engineering education, or project-based learning, or whatever your expertise might be. That would be a good thing to put in here. So once you do all of that, it will, and if your username is unique, that is nobody else has already taken it, you will get a profile on JEET, on the website, on the JEET website. And what you need to do at that point is to send me an email, and in that email, let me know your username. I don't need your password, just the username, and maybe the top 3 things that you are interested in reviewing, or the top 3 areas or that you are interested in reviewing. So again, it could be computer science education, that's a broad kind of area. Project-based learning is another broad area. Or you could be even narrower and say, I'm interested in how mechanical engineering students are influenced by entrepreneurship activities or by internships or something like that. That perhaps is too narrow for me to use you as a reviewer, because who knows, maybe once in 100, 200 papers, one paper might actually have that kind of topic. But something that's in between those, or even for that matter, even if you just say computer science engineering education, or mechanical engineering education, those are kind of broad, but still they're narrow enough for me to assign you papers in that particular area. And there's many other examples. So if there are things in particular that you are interested in, like students having industry experience or things like that, just let me know that in that email that you send to me. So in the advertisement for this webinar, my email address was mentioned, but just in case you need that, it's soham.iucee@gmail.com, and I spell Soham as SOHUM, and then .iucee. gmail.com. So that's the email address that you want to use. Which incidentally, I just realized it's not listed on the JEET website. So I'll get in touch with them and I'll make sure that you can find that email address somewhere on the JEET website as well. So let me pause to see if there's any questions or comments so far. And actually, I don't see any. Let me check the chat just in case things have come from there. Nope, nothing yet. So hopefully all those signed up today are familiar enough with the GoToWebinar control panel that you can actually find how to drop down the questions tab, or to make the questions tab maximized and type in your questions. So again, if you don't know how to do that, I don't know how I can help you with that. But if you do know how to do it, just please feel free to type in any questions that you might have. Okay, so that was the first bit, which was just essentially telling you how to create a username for JEET. And then if you send me that username and information, I can assign you as a reviewer. So as a reviewer, okay, there's a question. Good. Let's see. Is there any essential qualification and experience to act as a reviewer in JEET? That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that question. So let me actually give you some more background to answer that question. JEET for a long time had been, I would say, a little bit of a closed journal. There was, well, I don't want to get into too much history, but let me just say there were not a lot of direct submissions to JEET itself in the past few years. Well, excluding like 2017 and 2018, if we go back more than 2 years, there were not a lot of direct submissions to JEET. So a lot of the papers that we would get for JEET in the decade or so prior to that were coming from, or let's say at least the past 5 years, were coming from the ICTI-EE conference, and maybe a few, maybe one paper a month or one paper in 2 months or something like that was getting submitted directly to JEET. So we didn't actually have a big need for reviewers for the journal because a lot of the review process was taken care of in the conference review, so as to say. What we realized in the last 2 years, and we've consciously tried to push or advertise JEET and to push the direct submissions to JEET, because we wanted to establish a quality process in order to get not just get better quality papers into being submitted to JEET, but also to have very high standards for review so that the overall publication quality can actually rise. So as part of that, we did recently, so in the past 2 years, get a lot of direct submissions to JEET. And just saying a lot of doesn't maybe help you, but let's say approximately 50 or so direct submissions came into JEET in 2017 and 2018. And so now suddenly there's been a lot of pressure to have a very systematic process to get the initial reviews done, which is the initial editorial review, which I do typically. The plagiarism check that Sridhar does using Turnitin, the plagiarism checking software, and then assigning it to review to get at least 3 peer reviews. And so I launched into this big story as a result of the question of, is there any essential qualification and experience to act as a reviewer for JEET? And the reason why I did that was to give you a sense of where we are at this point and how strongly we need people who are able to perform a good review to help us out with reviewing papers for JEET. So right now, at the moment, there are 35 papers in the reviewing queue, and I would say about 20 plus papers have reviewers assigned to them already, or are in some stage of, many are done with some stage of review and are in the resubmission stage or something like that. But there are still 10, 15 papers that have not even been assigned a reviewer. So if you would like to volunteer as a reviewer, and if you have, let's say, just a bachelor's or maybe a master's degree, and the master's obviously is not in engineering education, but in a technical area of engineering, but you are interested in these kind of papers, you've been maybe doing some of your own publication in engineering education research, maybe at the journal level, peer-reviewed international journal level, but maybe just at the conference level. Okay, all we're looking for is someone who is willing to spend their time, because we understand it does take time to do these reviews, and feels confident enough to do a review. And so I don't have a direct answer to your question to say you have to have a PhD in engineering education or something like that, because that's unrealistic. What we're looking for is people with experience who've reviewed before, perhaps for some technical journal or technical conferences or anything like that, and are confident enough that they can do a good job of the review. That's all we're really asking for. We're also here to help you do a good review. Okay, so if you turn in a review and the review doesn't meet the expectations that the associate editors or myself are expecting, then we'll get back to you and say, you know what, this is just 5 lines you've written. We're expecting a whole lot more detailed review. So can you spend a little more time and give us answers to these XYZ questions? And those questions and whatnot are precisely what I'm going to go through in the next 20 minutes or so. So hopefully I've answered your question. But if you still have a specific follow-up question, feel free to post in this over here. There's one more question. I was already registered as a JEET reviewer. Do I need to register again? No. If you're already registered, and even if you're not registered as a reviewer, because that's also a good question. I'll actually answer a broader question. If you ever submitted a paper to JEET, or just created a login and profile just for the heck of it, okay? If you have a username, you don't need to create one again, as long as, of course, you remember your password and can log in again. Okay, so as long as that's true, you just need to send me your username, and what I do at my end, if I'm assigning you for review, is I actually go into the list of registered users, and if you're not already elevated to the reviewer status within the JEET database, then I or one of the associate editors can actually go in and make you have that status or those permissions in order to review. So you can't directly become a reviewer just by signing up, but you can get a username and just send it to me or to one of the associate editors, and they can actually make that happen for you. Okay, so hopefully I've answered that question there. Okay, so in answer to the previous question, I was talking about the reviewer guidelines or the reviewer standards that we have. And my plan over the next, let's say 30 minutes or so, is first to walk through the reviewer guidelines, which you can find if you just look at the menu on the right-hand side, where we have advanced search for readers, author guidelines, reviewer guidelines. If you click on reviewer guidelines, it will automatically download a PDF. And that's something we're going to change very soon, in a week or so. If you click that link on the reviewer guidelines, we're hoping to actually have a page there. And then on that page, we can have the link for the PDF to download that. But we'll also have a link to this, the recording of this webinar, so that those who missed it today can also avail of whatever I'm showing you today. So that'll change soon. But for now, if you do that, you'll get this PDF, and I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to download it again. And this is what shows up. Okay, so this and this has recently been updated, recently as in day before yesterday. So earlier we didn't have the JEET logo, and I actually went through and made a bunch of changes to the things that we had here. So I'll quickly just read a few things that I think are worth reading. So before accepting a reviewer assignment, obviously you want to check to see if there's any conflict of interest. So you will find out that who is the author and who are what institution that is. And again, that's the case right now, because we do not have what is known as double-blind review. So our authors, when they submit a paper, are actually allowed to put in author names and institution information and things like that. We're debating about changing that. We've had a few discussions on the associate editor team, or the overall JEET team as such, and maybe by January of the coming year, January 2019, we'll come to some kind of conclusion on that, and it may still be the way it is, or it could become a blind review. In case it becomes a double blind review, which means the authors don't see who reviewed them and the reviewers don't see who the authors are, then that first bullet point is moot at that point, because you don't know who they are, so there is no question of conflict of interest. So the second thing is you want to read the abstract to determine if the article matches your expertise. So we, as editors, will try to do our best to find a good match, but sometimes we need to stretch your area of expertise a little bit. And you're welcome to take a look at the abstract and make that determination. And if you find out that for either of those two things listed there, for either reason, you are unable to do the review, let us know as quickly as you can, right? So there will be a way for you when you get that email invitation to review review the paper for JEET. You will be able to just say accept or decline in that. I'm hoping that's true. It's been a while since I've logged in as a reviewer, so I don't actually remember what the options are, but hopefully that's an option. And if not, just email me directly, and I'll make sure that I assign the review to someone else. Okay. Number 3, again, maybe that's also another reason why you might not take up the review assignment, which is maybe you're just very busy in the coming 3 or 4 weeks, right? You know that there's some big thing that's going on on your campus, or you're just traveling, or there's, for some reason or the other, you will not have sufficient time to complete the review. If for either of these things you need to not sign up as a reviewer, just let us know as soon as you can. Okay? So it also says here the typical expectation is that you finish the review between take 3 to 4 weeks to get the review done. Most of the times the review doesn't take more than 4 to 5 hours, depending on how good a match the paper is with your expertise, and also how well the paper is written. Very good papers actually take very little time to review. Papers that are really, really bad, where you read 5 sentences and you realize that this is not really going to go anywhere. Hopefully they don't make it to you as a reviewer, because when I do my editorial review, I will catch things like that. But sometimes some things might slip through, and you might still get a paper that's just so poorly written, or just doesn't have any results or anything that you're looking for. So it's a pretty quick review. You can just spend maybe 30 minutes on it, and you realize that, yeah, this is not going to work out. Most other papers will lie in between those two extremes, and will take you, I would say, between 5 to 8 hours to review, depending on how big the papers are, and depending on how much you have to do as far as additional reading, or really getting into the details of the paper itself. So speaking of what you're looking for, once you accept the review, you will have 3 or 4 weeks to get it done. The sooner you get it done, the better, especially given the kind of backlog that we've accumulated over the last 2 years. We would like to see quick reviews, which we really appreciate. But nonetheless, here's the things that you should be looking for. Okay, and I'm going to just walk through this, and once I'm done with that, I'll come back and see if anyone has any questions. So title, does the title summarize the main theme of your paper? Yes, no. And also I've added a note here saying it says yes or no in this guideline over here, but you might as well in some cases do a ranking from 0 to 5. And again, this is for your benefit. You can use this as you see fit. This is not a fillable PDF that you actually turn in, although that might be a good idea to do that as well. And also just, I'll take a quick detour here and just say, you can type in your questions, but at the same time, if you have suggestions for us, very happy to take your suggestions as well. So don't just type in questions, you feel free to type in suggestions as well. Okay, so moving on from the title, the next thing would be the abstract of the paper. Is the significance of your research made clear? So again, these were written as author/reviewer guidelines. So when they see your, we're talking about the authors. Okay, so is the significance of their research made clear? Is the salient result mentioned? So for what did they find out? Are they, have they explained the main thing that they found from the results? Is the implication of research included? Right. So this is different from the results. It's taking the results and contextualizing them and saying, okay, now that we have found this, what does that mean for our research area or for this topic or for this particular context? Is the information in the abstract consistent with the rest of the paper? So when you're just looking at the abstract, you may be unable to answer this question, but once you've looked at the whole paper, this would be a useful thing to go back and say whether that's true or false. And then finally, does the abstract state the main conclusion of the paper? Right? Sometimes you see people write an abstract and they're just like, this is what's going to come in the paper, so go ahead and read the paper. We're not going to tell you what the main finding was, or what are questions. Nope. Oh, there is a question that came up earlier that I haven't answered yet. So is there, once you do a review, is there a certificate that's being sent to the reviewers? So we don't have a certificate for a reviewer, but I'm happy to write a letter thanking you for your service that you can use in lieu of a certificate. I've done that for at least one reviewer in the past that I remember, and I'll be happy to do it for anyone who's done a review for JEET. Speaking of acknowledging reviewers, starting in January, or the coming issue essentially of JEET, we want to publish a list of reviewers from the previous year. So in the January 19 issue, we're planning to publish a list of all the reviewers who reviewed papers in 2018 for JEET. Okay, and I've seen this done in some of the best journals in the world. And the reason why they do an annual one typically is because if you just do it for a quarter or for just the papers that were published in that particular what do you call it, volume, then it might be easy for reviewers to identify, or for authors to identify, who the reviewers for their particular paper were. So we want to have that the reviewers protected from being outed, so as to say, oh, this person reviewed this paper, or something like that. So we don't want that to happen. So we want to accumulate all the reviewers for the entire calendar year, and in the January issue, we want to acknowledge them by printing their names in the issue, just saying that these are the people who reviewed in the previous year. So let's see, there's one more question that's come up. Let's see. After posting a review, can the reviewer have a dialogue, telephonic or face-to-face, with the writer to help the writer for improvement? Such a dialogue, if solicited by the writer, should help both the writer and the reviewer. So Anil, thanks for that question. I like the concept of it, but at the same time, we want to preserve the anonymity of the reviewer for various reasons. It's generally not considered a good idea for, in many cases, for the reviewers to know who they are, who wrote the paper, but definitely for the authors to get in touch with the reviewers, because quite often, especially given the case that you've pointed out where there's a lot of improvement needed, there is always a possibility of the authors trying to bribe the reviewer to do, in the second round of the review, to do a favorable review, especially if they've been working with them. Now, I know you, Anil, personally, and I know you are not bribable, but that just opens the door to things that we don't really want to see happening. However, we do want to, in the long term, maybe offer these kind of services in general for our authors. And so if, for those of you who know Pratibha Nagabhushan from Australia, she has volunteered her services to help with the writing quality of the papers that come in for JEET. So far, I don't think we've actually been able to utilize her all that well, but my hope is that once authors find out that this is an option, and Pratibha also manages to figure out how much time she can devote to this, we could have a service like this where we're hooking up some papers that are good, but maybe just not well written enough that they need that extra push in the writing quality aspect of it. Overall, in the IUCE and Indian engineering education ecosystem, we are trying to create a lot more. Just as an example, I'll take a quick detour here and say we are doing a course on engineering education research right now. We are also going to offer a workshop on engineering education research at the upcoming ICTI EE conference, both locations. And we're going to follow that up by a 1 month, I mean, not a 1 month, a 1 year long, 1 or 2 webinars per month series, helping those who sign up for the workshop. If they're actively writing a paper, we, as a team of 6 or 7 people, want to help you with all the different aspects of writing the paper. So it's not just the writing quality itself, but helping you even figure out for this particular research question, what kind of experiment should you set up? Should it be a qualitative study, a quantitative study, a mixed method study? How best to collect the data, how best to analyze the data, and then how to interpret the data and actually present it in the form of a peer-reviewed journal or a peer-reviewed journal article. So we are trying to offer these kind of services on, based on whoever signs up and is interested, and if we get a match, we're planning to do that. But so I guess that answers your question. You've already said okay. So let's see, 2 more questions have come up. Let me take a quick look. How will you rate the quality of review when you get 3 reviewers take part? I don't actually understand the wording. Quality of review, I will take that as a separate question. How do you rate the quality of review? Well, I go through, I look at the paper, or if I've assigned it to the one of the associate editors, they will do an internal review of the paper themselves, and they'll then see for the 3 reviews that came in, how well that matches up with what they are thinking. Or if the review points out something new that they didn't think about, then fine, that's a good thing as well. So there seems to be a follow-up from Thani, who asked the first question. So there are very poor reviews from non-experts. How do you deal with that? Yes, okay, that's a more specific question. So in the unfortunate situation where we have really bad reviews or poor quality reviews for an article, we try to reach out and get other reviewers, and we have our own internal database that in which we enter things like how long did this reviewer actually take to do the review, how was the quality of the review. Actually, we have a 5-point scale marking how good the review actually was. And if they did a really bad job with the review, we're not going to ask them to do more reviews for JEETs, right? At the same time, for the one paper that we're talking about where we did get poor reviews, well, we just have to go ahead and request more reviews, hopefully from people who are better qualified to do those reviews and have put in the time to do a good review. And until we get at least 2 reviews that we agree with or we can use to make a decision, we keep soliciting more and more reviewers until there's at least 2 reviews that are useful for us to make a decision and move forward. So that's typically our process. If the reviewer is interested in becoming a better reviewer, we're happy to help with that as well. And again, this recorded webinar is one way that we're hoping that people will take a look at these guidelines. And I'm going to show you a couple of samples as well, where we've done some reviews. These are anonymized samples, so I can share with you to see, or set a stage for what we're expecting from the reviews. Okay. So there's a few more questions, but let's see. I'll just very quickly look at those. So it will help if you have a 0 to 5 scale in Excel format. Yes, that's a good suggestion, and we'll definitely. So in a few weeks, we're having our own JEET team meeting. So we'll discuss these things, and if there is a better thing that we can give you to do the review, sure, we'd love to do that. We'd love to give you that. One last comment here. The general awareness about engineering education is poor in India. There is a need to address this issue first. So yes, I agree, Srinivas. The general awareness, especially with regard to research in engineering education, is poor. But it's the overall ecosystem that we're trying to improve, and you cannot wait to do that before you try to get papers reviewed. So, and again, we don't solicit reviewers only from India. In fact, I've had a bunch of, through my network, I've requested a bunch of reviews for people who are in the US. So there's a bunch of different people that review, and the quality of the reviews can vary, but as the editor or as associate editors, we're going to monitor that, and hopefully we don't get only poor reviews for making our decision. Okay. All right, one last question before I move on to the document that we started with. Is there any provision to write some specific comments and suggestions while reviewing the paper? Yes, I'll answer that question, and I'll show you an example as well. Okay, so again, let's go back to the reviewer guidelines sheet that we have here, and just look at the various things that are on here. And again, obviously, you can read this in your own free time. But because we have a webinar going on, I'll just go through this in case you have any questions about any of these specific things so that I can address those questions right away. So for the introduction section, does the opening sentence state the importance of the chosen topic area? You'll be surprised at how many times we see papers that don't do this. I mean, it's the introduction of the paper. You would hope that the very first sentence says something to the effect of, why is this important? Why should somebody read this paper, right? So hopefully they've done that, and if they haven't, then you can make a comment about that. Actually, you know what? I'll go back and answer the last question that was there. So specific comments. So when you're typing up your review, there are two things you can do. You can use the JEET website has a cloud icon, which you can click on in the reviewer screen, and I don't have the reviewer screen open right now, so I just have to tell you about it. But there you can just type in your comments. What I would recommend is actually typing them in a Word file, so that you can do the spell check and all those things. And once you've completed your review, take everything that you've written in the Word file and just copy and paste it into the comments icon or the cloud icon, or when you press the cloud icon, there is a pop-up window that comes up where you can actually paste your comments. The other thing that I would highly recommend that reviewers do is, when you've downloaded the paper, just annotate that. So if you're using a PDF reader, you can put your own comments at various parts. You can highlight sentences in the paper. You can do a bunch of different things as part of your review, and then when you save that document, you can upload it as well. So you can not only put your comments, but you can also upload an edited document for the authors to take a look at. And I encourage reviewers to do both, because it's great to do a summary of what you want the authors to know, but also if there are specific places in the paper where things need to be fixed, you can do that as well. And if there are a lot of, say, grammatical mistakes, you can just highlight them in yellow or something like that. And in the comments, you can say everything that's highlighted in yellow needs to be fixed. So you don't need to go in and fix it as a reviewer. If you want to do some of that, that's great. I do it sometimes myself. But if you don't have that much time And if there are, a lot of grammatical errors, so if there are like 10 or so in the whole paper, then I'll just go ahead and fix them for the review, for the authors. And if it's a Word document and I've turned on track changes, they can actually see that and just accept the changes. Or if it's a PDF, then you can just make comments at specific places on what the fixes should be. So certainly you can do that. So let me get back to the document, and then once I'm through with this document, I'll just go back to the reviewer comment, or not the reviewer, the participant comments and questions. So is the background information about the topic of the paper provided? So yeah, and again, these are like the 0 through 5 scale. I shouldn't say it's just a yes or no, but you can rank these on a scale. Is a review of related literature included in the introductions? This is important. Or if they have a separate related work section, how good of a job have they done in looking at what the existing literature is on this topic, and then identifying how their paper actually fills a gap in the literature. So we're kind of asking for a lot here, considering the kind of papers that JEET has been has published in some cases, but this is the standard that we are aspiring to. So we really want to see the authors do these kind of things where they've said, okay, this is historically, this is what's been done. Recent research shows blah blah blah, and yet there is this gap where some research could provide more insight on this overall topic, and that's why we've undertaken this study. So that's ideally what you want to see in the introduction section. And then hopefully it ends with either a research question or a hypothesis that makes it very clear as to, in the broad context of things, what specifically or what exactly is this paper contributing. And usually that's the research question or hypothesis where it makes all those things very clear. One last thing to keep an eye out throughout the paper, but also in the introduction section, is are references made in the section acknowledged appropriately? So, if they say so-and-so has done this work, well, do they actually refer to their work in terms of a citation at the end of the paper, but also an in-text citation over there? So keep an eye out for those kind of things. And then moving on to methods, the participants part of methods. Does the method section include the number of participants in the study? Does it adequately describe the characteristics of the participants? Does it include the criteria or sampling procedure used to select or exclude the participants? So again, we're getting into details here, but and I would say overall for the method section, the one thing, and I think I have it down here, overall, is the section detailed enough to provide sufficient information for the reader to understand the study and for someone to replicate the study at their institution or in their situation if they wanted to. So ideally we want these two things to be a yes, and then what you see on top are just components of that, just as a reminder to you as a reviewer, and perhaps even to the author, if they're using this to write the paper, that they need to provide all of these things. Moving on to results, is the results section logically organized? Are the findings presented in one place, like text or table or figure? Is the researcher, or if the researcher has designed a questionnaire, does this section include some kind of reliability index? Does this section mention only the facts? Right. So quite often we see, instead of just presenting the results in a non-judgmental or just the facts as they are, people try to give their interpretation of the results as well. Ideally, you want that to be in a separate section. So if they've done that, as a reviewer, it's not a big deal. It's not enough to like reject the paper or something like that, but you can give the author the feedback that you should separate the facts that are presented in the results section from your interpretation or what follows into a separate section called the discussion section. So speaking of the discussion section, does the section start with a purpose and answer to the research questions mentioned in the introduction? So if you've taken my engineering education research course, or if you've taken if you're familiar in general with engineering ed research or research in general, you know that you want to set up the broad context, then you want to talk about specifically what you have done, then you want to talk about the results that you obtained, as a result of your experiment, and then you want to take those results and you want to plug them back into the broader context that you set up earlier in the paper. So this discussion section should tie all of that back together and say, okay, so this is what we found, and because of these findings, how does that change what we know about this topic, or what does this add to what's already known? And so that kind of broad tying everything together should happen in the discussion section. So what are the implications of the results, and so on. And finally, in the conclusion, there should be a clear conclusion, right? What did they find out? And it doesn't always have to be a positive conclusion. I've written papers personally where I've said, okay, we did all this, we set up this study, and we asked these questions, we got these results, analyzed them, and finally, it's either just showing what was already known, right, which is still a contribution, or if the research question or the hypothesis was such that it was trying to say this will work better for students, and having seen the results, we found out that actually it doesn't. That's worthwhile mentioning in the conclusion as well. So the point here being, is there a conclusion? It doesn't matter which direction it's going in, but is there a conclusion? And does the conclusion sum up the results in the investigation mentioned in the introduction? So is there consistency throughout the paper is also something we're looking for, because if they ask a certain research question, but then the data shows something else, and the authors sort of forget about the research question and come to a different conclusion at the end, they really should go back and either change their research question or address that in the conclusion to say, yeah, we started with this, but here's what we found out. So isn't that interesting? And then, just acknowledge the fact that they had a different research question and they answered something else. Finally, in the references, we are recommending APA. And again, once we meet in November, by January, I think we are going to enforce APA and just say, okay, that's what JEET is going to use. So if you're used to IEEE or some other format, it doesn't matter. We expect APA, and everyone has to do APA. So I'm 90% sure that that's how we're going to end up just enforcing APA. APA, by the way, stands for American Psychological Association. It's one of the most commonly used citation formats. A lot of information available on that if you need to. And finally, is there a reference in the reference list for every citing presented throughout the article? So again, a little bit of detective work that you have to do to make sure that authors, just because they thought they should have maybe 30 citations at the end in that reference list, randomly just added papers that they're not actually citing in the text. And again, I've seen that myself, so that happens. You should be watchful for that. And if that's the case, you need to point that out as a reviewer. Okay, so that's the checklist itself. There's a little bit more in this document, but let me quickly see if there are questions, comments that have come up since then. Just want to mention about IUC initiative, engineering and research. Yes, we did at the leadership summit. We did talk about these things, and we'll connect those dots at the conference as well. When the pages are restricted, it is very difficult to provide all information in the paper. How will you deal with that? Actually, I don't think we restrict pages in JEET. I'll have to double check. And in fact, if we do, then we want to make sure that we change that, because I don't think there should be a page restriction. We need around 15 pages to provide needed. So same person saying these things. So yes, okay, you want 15 pages? You can write 15 pages, no problem. All right, so no other questions at this point. So let me actually, excuse me for 1 second. I think I have a cough coming up. All right, so sorry about that. So let's look at what else is there in this document, because the time has passed pretty quickly and we just have 15 minutes left. So In this document, I've also put in a few other things about what you should be looking at overall, like the originality or novelty of the work, uh, significance of the contribution, relevance to JEET, that is how good of a fit that is. So again, hopefully that's not an issue for you, because as editor, I will have already seen the fit. And then the quality and clarity of writing. So again, in relation to that, there is a bunch of things that you should be looking for. Is it readable? Is it understandable? And then maybe some more advanced things like, is the paper organized well into sections and paragraph, and does each paragraph have a topic sentence which is appropriate, and so on. A few other things I would say I definitely want you to look at. And again, I don't want to read all of this text, but essentially the message I'm trying to convey through all of this is that your review should be helpful to the author, right? Even if it's a poorly written paper, we as reviewers should try our best to not be harsh or discouraging, but be encouraging in whatever form that we can, and provide useful comments to the authors, right? So just make sure that you're aware of that. And you know, the last sentence I've written there is, as a reviewer, you think about how would you like your own manuscript to be reviewed, and then review accordingly, right? So hopefully not too many more questions about this. And in the end, as I was saying, you can do both. You can put in your paste your comments, and also upload either a Word file or a PDF that I can then share with the authors. So that's that document. Let me see if there's any new questions that have come up before I show you a couple of samples. What is the cost of publishing in JEET? There is no cost. This is a peer-reviewed journal. We bear the costs of the whole process. So as far as I know, it's free. If that's not the case, you should certainly let me know. Thanks for accepting 15 pages. That's fine. Please display your email at the end of the session so that we may contact you immediately. Okay, I can do that. In my experience in the review, I found some papers are descriptive research without any research questions or hypotheses. How do we educate the authors? Well, try your best to give them feedback which might be at a high level, right? So maybe the paper is not, you know, JEET quality, and you don't need to do a very thorough, detailed review sentence by sentence, but you can give useful information that's at the high level, where you say, you know what, for this kind of a journal, it's not sufficient to, and again, it used to be at one point, right? But we're changing gears. We're really trying to ramp up the quality of JEET in this last year and in the upcoming 3 or 4 years. So it's no longer sufficient to just say, this is an initiative that we did in our college and it worked really well, and if you want, you can do it in your college too. So that kind of paper is no longer going to get accepted in JEET. So we just need to let the authors know that we're looking for serious research papers here. I would like to volunteer as a regular reviewer. I have already reviewed. Oh yeah, Srinivas, thanks for doing the reviews, and we really appreciate that. And so you keep up the good work. It's good to know. I generally try to not burden our reviewers with more than one review per year. But with the associate editors coming in and sometimes us not being able to keep track, we have actually asked people to do more than one review per year. And also with the number of papers that have come in, we appreciate it. If you want to do more than one review per year, just let me know that. In fact, let me know how much bandwidth do you have. Can you do one every 2 months? If you can, great. Just let me know that, and I'm happy to have regular reviewers that we can rely on. Do we review the revised papers to check compliance? Yes. So so what you do is, as a reviewer, you submit your review. Then as an editor, I take that review into consideration. I take my own review of the paper, and then I make a decision on whether to reject the paper, to have them resubmit addressing all the changes that they have made, which I will say in my experience over the past 2 years is the most common category, where if they've had some good reviews, then I asked them to address all the reviewer comments in a separate document explaining how they've addressed them, and then also submit the document which has, well, the manuscript that has addressed all those things. So definitely we hold their feet to the fire. If they've received some useful reviews or comments, then they need to address those and resubmit for review. So that's the second category that I was talking about. So reject or resubmit for review. The third category is if I find that the reviews are of the kind where, yeah, they're very helpful, but there is probably no need for a whole review cycle, which takes time because reviewers then again take 3 or 4 weeks or maybe more a lot of times. But if when the resubmitted paper comes in, I take a look and it's very clear to me that they've done a good job, and again, the things that were asked of them were not a whole lot that would actually require a second round of review, then we just ask for a resubmission, which I review or which the associate editors might review, and then accept the paper for publication. So to answer your question, one more time, if the review actually required, in our opinion, that there should be a second round, then yes, absolutely, the same reviewers are requested for the second round, and they can go and take a look and see, okay, I asked you to do these 5 things, you've done 4 of these things, and then you've given me an explanation for why you did not do the 5th thing. So ideally, that's what we want to see, and that's what I've been trying to push as the co-editor-in-chief. Okay, so there's no other questions, comments for the moment. So let me just quickly, we've got 9 minutes left. I'll share one, actually, let me show you the other document quickly first. So this is an example of how you, if you choose to actually go in and make changes and help the author out in this level of detail, you can do that. I did this for an abstract because the rest of the paper was very much like this, and I said, okay, I'll give you an example of what quality I'm expecting by editing your abstract, but then I'm not going to go through and rewrite your entire paper for you as a reviewer. So I'll just do this as an example and then say, well, if as an author you can give me this quality of work, then go ahead and change, make those changes to your paper, which I might just highlight them at that point, but I won't actually rewrite the paper for them. And that's what I expect from my reviewers as well. I don't want you to write their paper for them. So that's one example. That was a quicker one. So let me show you the other example. And I'm hoping you can see all these things. Let me check with my GoToWebinar window. Yeah, good. So you can see all these things. So here's another example. So this one in particular was for a paper that we ended up rejecting. Okay. And I wrote this review at the end of that as an editor because they'd received some reviews and I'd asked for a resubmission. In their resubmission, they had not addressed the things that we had asked them to address. And so I said, okay, you know what? No, this is not okay. You got some good reviews and you really need to change your paper to meet those standards. We're not going to publish it otherwise. So what happened was I went in and I did this review. I said, okay, writing quality is good, introduction is good, but when you start going into section 2, it's well written, but there is a lack of references. And they had a particular table that was listing a whole lot of studies that had been done previously, and none of them had a reference. Okay, so I said, no, that's not acceptable. You have to do that. Number 3, the claim in the abstract and title is too strong. So they were talking about how what they were doing at their institution was going to transform the engineering education landscape in India or something like that. Okay, so when you're making that big a claim, you need data to support that. And unfortunately, in their paper, there wasn't any data to support that. So then I said, okay, you either change the abstract and the title to reflect what exactly you have done, or you bring that data. There are only 2 options. You cannot make a claim and then not support it in your paper. So I won't go through the whole thing, but the point I'm trying to make is that I gave them very specific and detailed feedback on how they could improve the paper while I was actually rejecting their paper. So then I said, and this is a tall order because I'm asking them to do a lot of things that personally I didn't think they would be able to actually do them. So that's why I rejected the paper but gave them this feedback. But in my email to them, as the rejection email, I said, if you're actually going to do all of these things, I welcome you to resubmit the paper as a new submission, and I'll take a look and see, if you've done these things, and then I'll send it out for a round of reviews, because we still want to get reviews for this new submission that you've done. And they went through the whole process, and this paper was actually published eventually in the journal. So going from something that looked like, yeah, they're never going to do this, let's reject the paper, to going through the motions of, yes, they actually did that, and we got it wanted to share with you. So even if you see a paper that, in the previous comment that we had was, just a description without any data, that doesn't mean that people aren't capable of actually collecting the data to prove or disprove whatever claims they're making. So we should have faith in our authors, and we should give them, sometimes negative feedback, because, their paper deserves that, but give them a way to address those things and come back and give us a good paper, which is what we're hoping for. Okay, so I see there are no new questions or comments, which is not bad. We have another 3 minutes or so before we end this webinar. So I'm hoping that the samples that I have shown you are also somewhat useful. And again, I'm sorry I'm not logged into JEET as a reviewer, so I can't really show you the screens that come up when you log in as a reviewer. And if I do that as an editor, I'll be showing you things that are supposed to be anonymous. So that's why I'm not pulling up my JEETs on the other browser that I have. So I'll wait for 2 more minutes to see if there are any more questions or suggestions at this point. I'm happy to answer them or to take in those suggestions. And as to how do I actually send you my email address, let's try to figure out a way to do that. I'll go through the chat over here, and I'll just type in soham.iucee@gmail.com and then send. So hopefully all of you just received that email address that I just sent out. And as I said earlier at the start of this, hopefully in a few weeks, and I keep saying November and January because December is going to be very busy, we'll get these things sorted out where my email address appears on the JEET website. Happy to do that. All right, one more comment just came in. Thank you for sharing the review process of JEET. Please do share the webinar webinar course on engineering education research. Yes, we will advertise that very soon. So right now I'm doing a special section of that for the APSSDC collaboration that IUCE has. But for the rest of India, or for that matter, rest of the world, anyone who wants to join in, we will send out the advertisement for that in just a few weeks. Actually, by December 1st is what we're hoping for, so just a couple of weeks. Okay, last comment was thank you for all the guidance. You're most welcome. And again, I want to thank you not only for wanting to be a JEET reviewer or having done reviews for JEET already, but also for showing up at this webinar and giving your suggestions, as well as asking questions that prompted me to address things that I had not thought about before. So we're pretty much at the end. Thank you, everyone. And I hope this thing gets watched by potential reviewers once we put it up on the JEET website. And that's it. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.